Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the third session of the Frankfurt Rights Meeting Hybrid Edition 2023. My name is Jenny Kühne. I'm Director of Rights and Licensing Solutions here at Frankfurter Buchmesse and part of the team organizing this conference. Before we start today, I do have some unfortunate news. One of our speakers, Hannah Vaughan, has unfortunately fallen ill and will not be able to join us today. Hannah, if you see this, get well soon. So that's the bad news. The good news is that our three remaining speakers have graciously agreed to step in and try to cover as much of the content as they can. Still, Hannah would have been our only rights seller on this panel today. So if there are any remaining questions after the session, anything that is still open, we will take these questions, these open questions, and strive to get answers for you, which we will be sending out together with the recording of the session. So no need to film this or take notes yourselves, because we will be sending both the recording, answers to open questions, and an extract of the information relayed here today by our speakers to you, hopefully by the beginning of next week. That was the bad news and the good news. Before I hand over to our session host today, I wanted to quickly thank all of you here in the room today for joining us, our expert speakers, not only for agreeing to share their insights and their knowledge with us, but also for being so flexible and taking on some extra tasks, and our partners, Frankfurt Rights, and our media partner, Book Brunch, who have supported us this year again. Thank you very much to all of you. And now over to our session host. I'm very, very happy to introduce you to Katharina Ewald, our very own, I want to say, because Katharina actually worked at the Frankfurt Book Fair for over 14 years, organizing conferences and events all around the world, putting them together, organizing, and also moderating. So we have a great expert here today. Katharina joined the German Film Institute and Film Museum, DFF, based here in Frankfurt as well, in 2020. Fortunately for the Film Museum, not so fortunate for the Frankfurt Book Fair. And there she's responsible for a German-Australian project, Constellation 2.0, and for the DFF streaming platform, Kino Plus. Katharina, again, thank you for joining us today. And over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. Hi and welcome. Welcome to the session From Book to Screen, Exploring the Film Rights Market. We have three amazing speakers here with us today who will tell us more about the journey from book to screen, be it non-fiction or fiction. And we will talk about traditional channels such as cinema and TV, but also about the still vivid streaming scene. And we will deep dive into a discussion all around the big question of what producers are looking for. What are the recent trends, genres, and themes, and how do they vary from region to region, from market to market? But first of all, let us all get a better idea of the film market itself, the players and the business models, because we all want to know how to get our books to the small or big screens of the world. So welcome with me, Erin Hennecke. Erin is an independent literary scout and the founder of Booksmart Scouting. Booksmart Scouting is the newly created scouting agency founded and led by Erin, drawing on her 25 plus years of industry experience and combining her love of great writing and film TV. She began her career in the subsidiary rights department at Viking Penguin, overseeing domestic, foreign audio, film, and TV rights before she moved on to the film industry. Most recently, she was in the books and IP department at Netflix before deciding to form her own agency, where she scouts for clients like the Hallmark Channel. Welcome, Erin. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Katarina. I'm so pleased to be here. And thanks so much to everybody for joining this session today. I hope you'll find it informative. I kind of just want to give everybody attending today a kind of overview of when we talk about the film and TV ecosystem, and not just Hollywood, but I'm going to be using kind of general breakdown of a traditional like Hollywood, if you're pitching to Hollywood, and then you can apply it to your region. We talk about, it's a world of buyers and sellers. So who are the buyers? They're the ones who are going to be obtaining the books and turning them into film and TV. we talk about the buyers, the first ones, I think the big ones are the studios. And you have Universal, you have Paramount, Warner Brothers Discovery, you have Walt Disney that now is incorporated Fox as well, and Sony Pictures. They're the big five. And most studios have their own little indie label underneath their umbrella. Like Universal has Focus Features, which did Oppenheimer. And then, you know, the other ones are like Sony Pictures Classics. Paramount has Paramount Animation and Players. Searchlight is the formerly Fox Searchlight. So they're kind of the second rung, and they're considered like the indies. We also have companies that are smaller than the studios and kind of independent of them. And there would be Lionsgate, which formerly MGM, which is now owned by Amazon. A24 is another one that's been incredibly prolific in the last 5 years. If you see a movie, you're like, oh, A24, there they go again. STX Entertainment is another one. So they're kind of like the indies. Then we have the streamers, which we've seen such a boom in the last 10 years of the streamers. I was an early adopter to the red envelope of Netflix back in the day. When you would get a disc sent home to your house, and it was like so exciting. So the major ones are Netflix, we have Hulu, we have Amazon Prime, Apple, Peacock, Paramount Plus, Max, Disney Plus, YouTube TV, Tubi, and there's a couple of smaller ones who are kind of struggling. And by tomorrow, there could be 8 new ones. Then we also have your broadcast channels, your cable channels. So the broadcast channels in America are like ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, PBS, you know, those kind of channels. And then like in the UK, it would be BBC 1, 2, ITV, Channel 4. And then you have specialty channels like Freeform, the CW, and the channel that I scout for, the Hallmark Channel, who does like primarily like wholesome romances and holiday stories. So they're the TV people. So they're the seller. They're the buyers, actually. Now, who are the sellers? The sellers who are bringing this material to these places to get them made into a film or to TV are, you can have production companies, producers, screenwriters, directors, agents, managers, repping screenwriting clients, directing clients, and book to film agents, publishing houses as well. I started at Viking Penguin in the rights department, so that's how I kind of learned. We got a lot of faxes and calls about who's the agent for this, and one actually faxed us. This is back in the days of fax. Who is Jane Austen's agent? And we just wrote CAA and faxed it back. Let them do it. So we did a lot of that. And also sometimes producers or directors will hire a book scout like myself, and we kind of cover the publishing landscaping for them and find things that the exact material that they're looking for. So that's what my job is. And so how does a book get to the screen? How does this happen? This magic happen? Well, the book or the property needs to get into the right hands. Now, how do we do that? So it's either a rights person or a co-agent will get the book to the right producer, the right bit of talent. It could be a director. And I think it's so important to be informed of like, oh, I read about this. I have this book that's about horse breeding. And it's this dramatic story about a horse breeder or whatever. And then you read an article about like, oh, well, Reese Witherspoon's really into horses. It's very helpful if you have an in being like, hey, I read that Reese is into this, so I thought she might like this book. And just being aware of who you're pitching to and bringing that personal touch is a huge help. So you want to get it to the material in the right hands. Agents are very helpful because sometimes if you have the material, if you have the film and TV rights as a rights person, but you don't have the Hollywood contacts or the film and TV contacts in your own region, that can be tough. So having an agent that you can work with that can rep the film and TV rights of the books that you have can be extremely helpful because they already have the contacts and they know they can they bring with them the cachet of an agency and their clients to bring it to producers, bring it to a studio, bring it to a streamer. It's just that little linchpin that can help. So that's why it's really important. And if you're a rights person that has strong film and TV contacts, I know Richard King did it for Orion in the UK. Now he's doing it at Bookouture. He's their rights person, but he handles specifically film and TV. You can do that if you got the contacts, it's great. But I think if you're not sure, and if you're not used to dealing with the contracts and the rights therein, because they can get very messy and very complicated, it's helpful to have that agent working with you to advise you, and they can work with you to say, well, this is what this option means. And when we say option, what does that mean? You have a book, you think it's a great book, you think it's a great movie, you want to pitch it to a certain director. You work with an agent, they pitch it to that director, they want to option it, they love it. Okay, so an option means it's that person is agreeing to try and set up or make that book into a movie. And the option can be a year, it can be 18 months. It's however much time you think that person needs to get that movie going, set up. The option price is a fraction, it's a part of a full purchase price, usually. So it's usually divvied up into like first, like sometimes people will pay on optioning, and then they'll pay a third on principal photography and a third on the end. That was just one of our clients had done it that way. It can be worked out however you want. It's not one set form. There's not one set template. So the option is how long you think you can get this rolling. And then once you get it going, then you pay the full price. Let's see. The rights that you want to make sure as a rights person that you have the film and TV rights. In older contracts, sometimes they can be referred to as performance rights. And sometimes in the newer contracts, they'll be parsed out to be like, here's film and TV, there's streaming, here's theatrical, they separate it. We want to make sure that you have the film and TV rights that on that book that you're holding. Option fees can vary. I've seen option fees that were, and I'm going to use American dollars, $5,000 to multi-million deals. It all depends. If there is a hotly contested property, something that's coming out, it got great reviews, it just hit the bestsellers list, everybody's talking about this book, there could be an auction where many parties get involved, and that kind of drives the price up a little bit as well. It keeps going up and up and up according to the interest. So it could really vary. And it's usually, let's see, the option, like I said, is usually for a year, 18 months, and that gives the producers time to set it up at a studio or a streamer. Sometimes they want to set up as a film, and then they second guess it, and they get a writer on board, and they'd be like, actually, this is better for a streaming series. And the great thing about that is we have so many outlets to go to now. I really think prior to the WGA and the SAG strike, which I'll go into in a minute because I think it bears mentioning, it was such a golden age for like book to film adaptation, because we have all these outlets and they all need material. They need to keep feeding the machine, and they want more material, and they want to compete with everybody else. And with the streamers, there's no end. It's not like a broadcast channel or a cable channel that has a schedule. They only have so many hours to fill, so they only can take a certain amount of material. The streamers can make as much as they can afford. They can keep making them. So it just became such a great time for books being adapted into film. So, and then so much so that it was like podcasts too, and articles and things like that. But I think books especially have become, they never were out of fashion, but I feel like because we have so many more places to go now, it was definitely more, of a time. But the strike that I mentioned earlier is the Writers Guild of America and the Screen Actors Guild of America are on strike currently. The writers since May, the actors since late June, July, and they're basically striking and not working, not writing, not acting, not performing, not promoting movies and shows they're in, because they're asking for the big issues, especially with the writers. The big issues are residuals, mainly from streaming. So if a writer has a hit show on a streamer and they don't know how many times it's streamed, they're not getting any extra money from that. In fact, they did a survey that showed that writers are making 14% less than what they made in 2008 at the time of the last strike. So we're going backwards, and that's not good. So residuals, also, there's an issue about writers' rooms. They're trying to kind of eliminate the old-fashioned writer's room and do something called a mini room, which basically is getting writers, a few, in a room, working on a project, writing, like, say, 10 episodes of TV for no money. We don't know if the show's going to get picked up, but write this, and then if it gets picked up, you'll get paid. That's crazy. So also with the shorter seasons, we used to have back on network TV, you would have 23 episodes a season, and that would keep you gainfully employed the whole year. And then maybe you have a few months off to, like, maybe work on a movie or be with your family. Now, all these shows, a lot of them are 6 episodes, 7 episodes. So writers keep finding themselves, they're not getting paid enough to live the whole year. They have to keep kind of hustling for another gig. And it's just becoming hard to sustain and support a family on that. And so that's another thing that they're petitioning for. It's just, I think it's people bristling against a very creaky system that needs to be revamped greatly. So it's not just the 1% at the top's making all the money. And that's what I think the powers that be are kind of bristling against and not wanting to sell that, to solve that. But we are in now, I think it's like day 130 something of the writer's strike, day 60 something of the actor's strike. It's surpassed the last strike that we had in writers. So we hope soon. We hope there's a resolution soon. We really do, because a lot of people, are out of work, and it affects so many other industries, not just the powers that play. It's like what they call the below the line people, the people who are working like the tech on the situation, craft services, drivers, restaurants in the areas of New York and LA where these places film. So many people are affected, and I just hope there's a resolution very soon. But it's a big sticking point now, so it just bears mentioning on the because Hollywood does affect globally the film industry, so it just bears mentioning there. Let's see what else I can tell them. Timelines on when you have a book option to a studio or a production company or a streamer. How long does it take to go from the option to getting it made? It can really take anywhere from like a year and a half to 2 years to 20 years. It really depends. My first, when I was scouting for Universal, my first acquisition for them, they got a New York Magazine article called The Return of Superfly. They optioned it for Imagine, their producers, in 2000. It was all set up to go with the director. Everything was ready to go. Denzel Washington attached, Benicio del Toro attached. It was a film to be named American Gangster. The night before production began, the studio had a falling out with the director. He left. Denzel Washington was like, well, I'm here for him. I'm leaving too. He left. Benicio del Toro left. Everybody left the day before production began. So I was like, this is dead in the water. This is never going to happen. 8 years later, or 7 years later, Ridley Scott was like, I really do like that piece of material. Let's revive that. I can get Denzel Washington back, no worries. And I'll get Russell Crowe to play the other role, the cop. And they got it together, thank God. And that was American Gangster, came out in 2008. And I really it just goes to show you never know. You think something's a surefire success is going to happen, you never know. And then you think something's dead in the water and it gets revived. You never can tell. So things can work very fast if it's a timely story, like many nonfiction books are about like the opioid crisis or a political person or a business person. They might move that a little faster. They might fast track that and get that done in like a year and a half. But it really depends. To get all the elements together to get it made, it takes a while. So if everything's going along without any bumps, it can be like a year and a half. That takes like that. A lot of studios and streamers welcome, and they're very supportive of giving authors a chance to adapt their own stuff. They have like Gillian Flynn adapted Gone Girl. Jessica Knoll adapted, she did Luckiest Girl Ever for Netflix. So they're definitely producers and streamers and studios that are welcoming to give the authors a first chance at like, hey, take a crack at it if you want to adapt this yourself. If not, there's always something to be worked out, whether it be a producer credit, they're definitely going to get it, based on the novel by or based on the book by credit. So that's always good. But I've seen them be very supportive of giving authors a chance. And let's see what else. I think helpful info for rights professionals, what you want to have when you're to have the material in English, to have a PDF or a Word doc if you're pitching like to the US is in electronic form is very helpful. If you have sales figures that are super strong, if you have great reviews or blurbs from other known authors, that's super helpful. If the author would like a chance to adapt it, what's their take? How do they see it? What are some recent comps you can give it, comparisons? I would say definitely get a strong pitch together and work out your elevator pitch, which is basically the essence of this project in a couple short, catchy sentences. Something that you're going to get somebody's attention right off the bat. They want to hear more the minute they hear your elevator pitch. So I would recommend that. And know the market you're pitching to. Do they want thrillers? Does this studio want thrillers? Does the streamer want thrillers? I mean, most places do. Do they want true stories? Do they want romances? What actors and screenwriters and directors that have they worked with before? Do they have good relationships with? And who do they want to work with in the future? All that research is very helpful. And that's just going to help you make another connection to that producer, to that director, and ultimately get that person excited. So when they turn around to the buyers and get them excited as well. So I would just say research is key. And I think they're all the major points. I think that I can think of. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Like I said, I did it in a very broad, general kind of like if you're pitching to the US. But if you take these points and take them in your own, like in your own territories and who you know are the big players to pitch in your own countries, it's a similar process. But I'll pass it back to Katarina. Thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you, Erin, for this really amazing and concise summary. I'm sure we all have tons of questions to you. So please go and type them into our chat. We will address them later in our Q&A session. Now we're moving on to a conversation between two scouting experts for literary adaptations, Deborah Kaufmann and Marion Köhler. Marion works as a director, literary and IP scouting fiction for Leonine Studios in Munich. Marion has more than 20 years of experience in the book industry. She was head of the fiction program at Deutsche Verlagsanstalt in Munich, followed by the publishing houses C. Bertelsmann and Penguin in the Penguin Random House Publishing Group. Most recently, she was publishing director of 4 publishing houses, Friedrich Oettinger, Dressler, Ellermann, and Moon Notes in the Oettinger Publishing Group in Hamburg. Today, she is responsible for the acquisition of books suitable for film adaptation and other IP content for the film production companies Odeon Fiction and Wiedemann & Berg, both part of Leonine Holding. And then we have Deborah. Deborah is Vice President, Literary Affairs at Legendary Entertainment. Previously, she was a senior editor based in Paris with Éditions Michel Lafon and Coleman Levy, where she was publishing award-winning and international best-selling authors for 15 years. But she also moved out of the publishing industry. In 2014, Deborah moved on and has been overseeing acquisitions of literary properties for Legendary Entertainment's film and TV divisions in New York. I'm so happy to have you both here, especially with your background in publishing. And it's maybe another discussion we still have to have. Why is everyone moving out of the publishing industry into the film business? It's really interesting. So Deborah, let us start with a very basic question. When you're looking for IP, when I say intellectual property that you make into a film, what kind of IP are you looking for? What all can it be? Is it just books? Is it just stories?
It can be books. And well, first off, thanks, Katarina. It's so nice to be here today. And thank you all for listening. So of course it can be books. In the US, it's also magazine articles, and podcasts. It can be, as we've recently seen, a toy. It could be a song. It can be a play. So we're looking at the whole gamut. Or a video game, obviously. I should mention that's huge. Huge area of development and inspiration. So yeah, so basically, as a rights manager coming, pitching books to us, you're competing for our attention in the landscape of all the other intellectual properties, basically. So it's which I mentioned. It can be also, it can be fiction, it can be nonfiction, but there's this wide array of other intellectual property out there. And what it is that we're looking for. So do you mean the form, the original form? Like, I mean, the reason we're still interested in books is because, there's story. There is, the author has done the work for us. It's much harder, as people have seen, and very successfully with Barbie recently, that it's much harder to come up with an efficient storyline when there is no story. So obviously there's an intimate connection between writing and screenwriting, and yes.
So that means for us that, I mean, these are good news for publishers in the first place, that it's not only about toys anymore or something like that, but that real stories are still selling when I say real stories. But what are the common challenges? What is it that most of the rights sellers face when they have to negotiate with production companies?
Oh dear. There's oftentimes there's a misunderstanding about what it is that the production company wants to acquire versus what the rights seller wants to sell. Oftentimes studios have been known to be very greedy. Buyers have been known to be very greedy and want everything, every single possible potential right to the work. And the challenge is to finagle your way through that and make sure that as a publisher, oftentimes studios want graphic novel rights, they want sequel rights, they want prequel rights, they want and protecting the author's right to continue creating, for instance, is important. But I feel that I'm talking for the other side right now, Katharina. But that's very important, to make sure that when you're dealing with a studio, that the studio will, that in your dealings with the studio, the author is protected. And I'd like to address this as a European who's left Europe for the United States, and especially as a French person who deals with my French counterparts very often, have under the impression that there are no provisions in American law or in the American film and TV system to protect the work of an author. Because in France, we have something called le droit moral, which exists in different countries in different ways, but the American authors, so the droit moral protects something that's not financial, right? It's another kind of relationship to an artwork, or a piece of IP, if you will, and it is something that you can't get rid of. In the US, authors have agents, and there's a system of agents and co-agents and managers and sometimes lawyers whose entire job is to protect the author's best interest. So that exists, and the studios are used to that too. So, but oftentimes people dealing with Hollywood studios, they believe that they will be, that we're out, the studio is out to get the author. Nope. That's the good news. Not at all. And as Aaron was saying earlier today, the many studios have in fact welcomed in the past few years the creative input of authors in screenwriting and the adaptation process, and that has been to the benefit, not just financial, but also the artistic benefit of everyone involved.
I mean, as you're speaking now for the German language market, predominantly, so to speak, do you have the same experience? Are you searching for this? Are you seeing the same challenges?
Yes, I agree with Deborah in many aspects, especially if you look at IP again, because this is what we're all talking about all the time, and the need for IP is the thing. Every streaming partner mainly, but also all the broadcasting channels, they look for IP, which means brand authors. If we look at the book market, but what is a brand author? And there's a big difference between what a brand author is in publishing and what the film company or even the streaming partner, which most of the time is an international streaming partner, sees as IP. If you look at from a publishing perspective, especially from a smaller country, European country like Germany, France, Italy, Spain, I mean, a best-selling book has sold, let's say, 100,000 copies, which is really great. You're on the best-selling list for a couple of months, and it's a big thing to step over this six-figure mark. For a film company, even a German film company, 100,000 sold books is nothing. It's not an IP. So we have these differences there in what are we looking for. If I talk to my managing directors, they look for IPs that are, let's say, 300,000 sold copies, or ongoing authors with repeating bestsellers, so authors who sell 7 figures, so 3, 4, 5 million books. In a market like Germany, and that's true for France, Italy, and Spain as well, there is just a handful of authors in that category, in that sphere, I'd say. So there's a big fight around these few authors who sell that kind of amount of books film companies need. So that's something I always try to explain to my colleagues and align expectations, because talking to rights people is always, they say, yeah, we've sold 20,000 books. And I said, that's really nice. But if it's a book that hasn't sold, I mean, it's not, if you have a book that isn't a bestseller, we need something else to it. It needs to be very original, very special, trendy, zeitgeisty, a book that's really original. Then I can make something out of it and still pitch it and get my producers buy the rights. But this is a different kind of market than we're looking at. So this is something that is always, this is not easy to align expectations between rights people and the production company.
And if I may jump here, just in terms of my own experience, when I joined Legendary Entertainment, which at the time had produced Godzilla and Pacific Rim and had bought rights to Dune, it took me, I was a book editor in France before that, and it took me a few book fairs after I repeated enough times Godzilla, King Kong, Dune, to understand that this was the bracket that I was looking for. And even, and that's for film, for definitely, which film and television are different beasts in that space. But this is who I was, this was the brand. These were our IPs. So internally, even among my team, I can just, pitch a book that had a great story or had a decent track record. I had to compete with just internally, not compete, but just find a project that was akin to Godzilla, King Kong, Dune. And it, again, I was part of the company, and it took me a while to understand. So when I speak to rights managers or agents, it takes them a while to understand in which, what kind of intellectual property, what kind of brand or world building I'm looking for, and the company is looking for. But we did, invest also in smaller properties, such as Enola Holmes, for instance, which is a successful adaptation for us. The book series was virtually unknown in the UK. It had done well in the US, but it was highly pitchable. This was like an introduction at the world of Sherlock Holmes, a new Sherlock Holmes with a feminine twist. It was, this is just universally pitchable, and the stars were aligned, in terms of the talent interested in this, which was Millie Bobby Brown, and the people we were fortunate to work with on it, Jack Thorne and Harry Bradbeer. These were so you can also for a studio like the one I work for, you can also sort of tailor smaller IP if it's just the right thing. And and whenever people ask me what it is that you're looking for, it's a very difficult question to answer.
I mean, I love the term pitchable. I mean, that's totally brilliant. But would you say there are any other things that a publisher can bring on the plate, to make their pitch more attractive in terms of, for example, rights sold to that many countries to maximize the potential audience that is already there?
100%. 100%. And that's and it's something I think it's very important. I know that many rights managers who handle film rights also handle foreign rights, and sometimes they don't understand that they have gold at the tip of their fingers, because the information they have in terms of markets where their books are really successful can really make a difference for producers and studios. And and sometimes you have books that are successful in their original market, but they're doing better even in a foreign market. And a few years ago, I kept on telling my foreign rights colleagues or my film and TV colleagues to mention any book that was doing well in China, because this is where the eyes of Hollywood were we were all looking at, getting into the Chinese market, and optioning material that seemed to grab the Chinese readers and moviegoers' attention. So that was very important. It's a little bit less important now for political reasons, but we've also seen very successful American authors find their audience in film and television in Europe, or I was going to say them building their film and TV business completely out of the US market and in Europe. So for instance, so there are opportunities like that. I would say, be attentive to where that is happening, because if you have an author who's particularly, I don't know, very successful in Spain, for instance, and he's originally from Taiwan, or you might want to work with a Spanish producer, in fact, and a Spanish broadcaster even. So it opens up lots of opportunities. Yeah.
But would you say, because I think this is for when we look at the German market, for example, we saw a lot of German productions in the last years that really sold very, very well in cinemas. I mean, there was a trend when we look at the Oscars, for example, last year. There was a trend in German production and German content. Is this still going on, or is it something that works much better if you sell it to the US and then do something? Or would a German production even be good enough, Marion? What would you say? Not good enough, but work on the international markets? Were these just exceptions, or?
I mean, you have to look at every single project separately, but especially for the streaming market, perhaps that's easy to put together a thesis. You can say that many streamers look for local content, but local content that needs to be sellable globally. So a story set in one of the countries, might be a historical point in time, or person well known, or something like Oktoberfest in Germany, which is ongoing here in Munich at the moment. Something people know worldwide, and that combined with a strong plot, a original plot, that's something that can travel, and that's something especially the streamers look for. They call it even local goes global. So and since the German production market is strong in terms of working with these international platforms, this is something we try to find, these kind of stories that are that originate in a local national theme, but are told in a very international, global way. And that's something that's really, if you have that kind of story, that kind of book that tells that kind of story, this is something we would option quickly, in fact.
So, but that means you would recommend for a German publisher to talk to a German production company first, and maybe only then look at the US, because we are all looking at the US, right? I mean, we're all looking at selling our books to this big, huge market and selling our IP and content.
If the story is set in a national European market, it might be easier to find a national production company, because for us, for example, as a German production company, it's hardly impossible to produce something that's originates in the US market or UK market. We don't even find partners for that, because they say we have our own production companies, which makes sense. So if we produce internationally, the core is German. It might be set, some parts of the story might be set in other countries, but the core needs to be German. Then it's easier to sell. So if you have a story set in your country and that's attractive to an international audience, it's always easier to have your own production company, and they might look for a co-producer. That's something we do in Europe very often. The European market is there's a strong network within the European market for co-productions, and we work closely together. So for example, we work closely together with many Scandinavian companies, because it's an attractive, Germany is attractive for them, and their market is attractive for us. So we find stories that combine both countries in a way, in a character or in theme or in the setting. So that's something you could choose then. And as a, I mean, going back to the film rights sellers, that's something you could address in your pitch letter as well. So it's helpful to tell scouts or the producers, I mean, all the settings, where is it set? Is it possible to even, I mean, change the setting? That's also something we often do if we have the feeling that it's easier to find a co-production partner if you change settings or one of the main characters, the nationality of a character. So that's something you can address in your pitch letter. So, you know, then producers start thinking, and that's helpful.
Would you say there's something like a secret sauce to get into the US market, or something where you know this is how you should pitch if you really want to bring your titles from all around the world to the US?
Yes, a number of things. One, don't be shy, and please translate some material into English. I think that's fundamental, because you won't find readers, even if you have the best book in the world, it's going to be very hard to find. Look, between us, Hollywood doesn't read that much, so let alone in foreign languages. So you know, so you have to make that extra, bring, you know, take that extra step, and it's worthwhile both for foreign rights and for film rights. It's not going to be every book on your list. It's going to be maybe one every season, maybe, or one every year. And it's worth taking, you know, sort of budgeting this ahead of time, and maybe not the whole book, but definitely sample chapters, because for rarer languages, as we know, you know, to even penetrate the publishing industry or marketplace in the US, you need to bring, you know, material that is in English. It will make your life easier. So I would start with that. I would also recommend the comparisons, the comps that Erin was mentioning earlier. Stay on top of film and TV adaptations that are recent and that are successful in the US. I know this is very difficult to do when you don't live in the same market. And again, speaking of experience, I assume that American movies that had been huge in France had also been huge in America. And I would compare movies that are flopped in America to whatever material I was trying to pitch bad idea. so try to start, so that's very, very bad idea. Try to keep your comparisons current, and then I think there is an opportunity for more non-native English material adapted in Hollywood. There used to be, Hitchcock adapted Vertigo from a French novel, and we have countless examples. But they Planet of the Apes, people don't know, also a French novel. So I think there is an opportunity when your story can be, is universal, can be entirely relocated to another place, another cast, or if the concept is so highly original and groundbreaking as was Planet of the Apes. I would also say that there is an opportunity now to tell stories that weren't told before, and and this is something that Hollywood has progressed in the past 9 years I've been working here. It's more open to diverse storytelling, it's more open to diverse casting as lead stars, and it's a definite sign of progress. So stories that weren't told in the past, and didn't have outlets in the past, as Erin said also very aptly earlier, can be told, and there's more room, there's more freedom. You don't have to just make a movie in 2 hours anymore, or a TV show in 6 or 10 or 25 episodes. It depends. You can just serve the story creatively. So in that sense, there are more opportunities now. And I think because of the growth of streaming, there's just much more volume, and we're desperate for content, I hate that word. We're desperate for original ideas and great ideas that can be turned into movies and TV shows. And finally, if you have anything that looks like a franchise, that could be franchisable, that's also a big thing. Not to think about one adaptation, but look at something holistically. I would say that lots of graphic novel publishers in Europe and all over the world in general have understood this, and are able to talk with the studios in that sense, and have represented interest. And also look at your backlist titles, because that's where very precious books that have been adapted in the past, or were interested or were interesting to filmmakers in the past, are also sort of buried. So as long as you have those rights, don't neglect them.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this amazing discussion. I would now like to introduce Erin back to our session, because I think we have a couple of questions from the audience that we also would like to address. And so that we can continue our conversation all together. Okay.
Oh, I'm back.
You're back. Now you're here. Sorry,
you hear me okay,
I wasn't
right?
sure if you're back in the room. Yeah, thank you so much. I think something that we really learned from the previous discussion is research is king, right? I think this is a little quote that I wrote down. And what I really would like to understand better is how come that, for example, I mean, I don't want to ask why is something successful. I mean, we all don't really know, but but sometimes we see developments that are like building up slowly, For example, when we're talking about franchises, when we're talking about toys becoming movies, I think this is something that's happening since a couple of years. Do you have a feeling what is the next trend? Do you have an idea? Just a slight, like a gut feeling? what is happening at the moment, what we should all jump on, because if the timeline's also so long, you know, we have to think for the next 5 years, right?
I'm going to defer to Deborah and Marion on this, because in my previous life as a scout, when I scouted for Universal, I would know this answer because I'd have to be researching this answer. But currently scouting for Hallmark, I'm looking at a much different, I'm looking for wholesome romances, I'm looking for cozy mysteries and things like that. But everything else that's popular still affects what people want. For example, one exec asked me to find a Hallmark appropriate Big Little Lies. So something where it's like some secrets in a small town, but it just can't be too overtly sexual or too violent or anything like that. So what's successful does trickle down. These ladies would know better about big pieces of IP that people are going to be looking for studios. So I'm going to leave it to them. Take it away.
I mean,
Marianne, go ahead.
Yeah, I can go ahead without having an answer, as I think no one really has an answer. But we are discussing Oppenheimer now very intensively, and I think every studio does, because it's so unbelievably successced. And it cannot just be Christopher Nolan. It's too overly successful. And since it's an interesting topic, Oppenheimer and as a founder of the atomic bomb, and so we really look into these kind of historical figures, people who changed the world in a way, and I assume that one aspect to the success of Oppenheimer is that it's a relevant topic. So we, in fact, look for relevant aspects. And that's something we learned in the last 2 years, looking at theatrical successes or not successes, that as soon as even a comedy doesn't have any relevance, it's not working anymore. So even if it's a commercial setup and it's a comedy or a rom-com, whatever it is, there needs to be some sort of ground to it, some sort of relevance socially, emotionally, even politically in a way. Slightly and not into the face of the audience, but still we realize that it needs to be there needs to be something deeper to even a commercial film. And Oppenheimer was a good example that even a sincere topic, and the film is, it's a high quality film, so it's not a commercial film in a way. So that's something we at least are discussing intensively at the moment.
On the other side of the spectrum, I'm very, very interested in the area of romanticides, and I'm looking at it from a fandom perspective. I look at the romanticides are romances that are set in fantasy worlds. Sometimes you have a humorous element to them, and we've seen, for instance, in America, the #1 New York Times bestseller is a book called Fourth Wing, which sort of applies to that genre. So there's some world building, but the focus is really more on the love interest and in the fantasy world. And what I'm seeing, I'm not a big consumer of that genre on my personal level, but what I'm seeing is the growth of that market and of a readership, a fan base that is active socially. There's social engagement. Some of these books originate in social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, and they don't seem to have an outlet yet in the film and TV world. And so I think that this is an area where we will see attempts to sort of come to the screen. But we're also hearing from buyers, and by buyers on my end on TV, I'll say lots of buyers say they don't want period because they have so much in development. Not that audiences are not interested in period and historical productions, but just that they just have a lot in their pipeline. I I tend to believe that when you bring them the right thing, with the right, what they call in Hollywood a package, when the basically when the stars are aligned, you have the material, you have a story that is both a little familiar but not that familiar, a little, different. You have a star, you have a director attached, then the buyers listen, even if it is something that they told you they're not looking for at that moment. But it can't just be the book, unfortunately. It can't just be the book. I'm in love with a book that was published by Knopf a few years ago here, or was it Pantheon? It was about the Kellogg's brothers. And I want to make that into a musical, if you ask me. It's the quintessential American story, and it's what I call the Barbie of food. Nobody's interested. But I want to say also that there's very long development stories, and they're very happy and long development stories also, not just unhappy development stories. One of the most successful ones, I think, creatively, is probably The Queen's Gambit, which was optioned in the 90s by a man called Alan Scott, who was very, very fortunate at the time and bought the rights from, I think it was the author's widow already, Walter Tevis's widow, and kept the rights, then purchased the rights, and it took him years and years and years, to get it right and find the right producing partners, and the right creative team to bring it to the screen. And I think they did a brilliant job. So I'm very, it's very moving in many ways, because it took so long and it's just so perfect.
I have a couple of questions from the audience here right now. One was, what about unpublished content? Is there a chance for unpublished content in the market as well? Something that goes directly to screen?
I mean, if the story is original and very good, why not? Since we work with, script writers who invent their stories as well, so there's no such big difference. But it's not an IP. It's really just then someone needs to fall in love with the story.
I like curated content. It makes my life easier.
Speaking about what makes your life easier, we have one more question. Does it make sense to employ specially trained people to write film-ready pitches? Because after all, it's slightly different in the film sector compared to in the book sector.
It's helpful, yes. Since many film rights colleagues, here, at least here in Germany, send out the manuscript and a short log line, a short synopsis, and my colleagues need a longer one. So I'm the one, typing in the synopsis, or I ask someone to do that. And that's really helpful to have someone being able to, first of all, give a longer synopsis with all characters, all settings. And so that's something we need. We definitely need, and we don't often get, unfortunately.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Helpful. I agree too.
And I have one more question here that goes into a similar direction. What happens if the author has already written a screenplay to the novel? Is it like a complete no-go for you? Or is it something to mention, or is it a complete no-go?
I think it's something to mention. It's always, when I hear that, I'm like, okay, great. Well, that could be really helpful. And, as I said, many places, many producers and streamers are willing to give the author first crack, because that's a great thing. If you look at, like, on Netflix, Harlan Coben's Oeuvre, like, that was a relationship that started with acquiring one movie. And now they have all Harlan Coben's books up there. And it's a great way for them to start this. It's a trust, like, oh, we're going to begin a good relationship. If they feel like maybe it's not strong enough, they might suggest having somebody else do a polish, or they'll explain why this is great, but maybe we can have somebody come in to make some changes that might get, more appropriate for our streamer channel, what have you. But I definitely think it's not a no-go at all. It's a good starting point.
Would that also mean, because I get one question that we discussed yesterday, actually, one last question I have, that we discussed yesterday. Oh, okay, it's fine. That we discussed yesterday, actually, in our free event conversation. Are you seeing opportunities for non-fiction content, particularly given the growth in streaming at the moment?
Oh yeah, I mean, Marianne mentioned Oppenheimer. You know, that's the mother of all nonfiction, and you know, the Killers of the Flower Moon, the Scorsese movie coming out in October here, is also a big nonfiction book by David Brown. The Wager, David Brown's next book, or New York Times bestseller, has been optioned again by Martin Scorsese and with Leonardo DiCaprio. So, you know, bring it on. You know, the nonfiction, if the nonfiction is outstanding, if the story, and again, if the story hasn't been told yet, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. I think there was a book, Michael Lewis's latest book was just optioned by Apple for 3 million or 5 million, I think.
Oh yeah, the one on SBF, right?
Yes,
Sam
on
Bankman-Fried. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, Michael Lewis is also the author of The Big Short, for instance.
Everything he does.
He does is optioned, and yes, Moneyball, for instance, also. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think it's particularly new. I just think there's just much more volume and more people to feed. And also, I think many of us have discovered also, you know, I've been exposed to more documentaries with the streaming access. So, you know, there's, you know, fictionalized adaptations, and there's non-fiction adaptation of books, of non-fiction books. Mm-hmm. Unscripted.
We're talking about options. We have one more question here. When talking about options in the film streaming market, in case the producer doesn't use the option within the set time period, like the first option, what happens with the payment?
All right. Do you want to address it, Marianne?
Yeah, I mean, there's this payment for the option, and that's gone then. So the author might keep it. So at least in our contracts, I don't know about other contracts, but in our contracts, that in Germany, that's the usual way it is.
So yes, and so you usually pay one option, you know, one option payment upfront, and then sometimes you can pay another option, because the hefty payment is obviously the purchase price, which you pay when you commence production, when you start the production of the movie or the TV show. So, and sometimes, as discussed, you can't just put together a movie in 18 months. It takes too long to get from, sometimes you're very lucky. You can get a script done in less than a year and find talent and have a director, and then you go sell your project to the broadcaster or the studio. But sometimes it takes longer, and sometimes pieces fall apart, as Erin mentioned earlier. Your director leaves, your star leaves, you know, you have to replace those elements. So thankfully, there's this process where you go from 18, sometimes a year or 18 months, you add an extra year. Some of this money is payable against the advance. Some of that money is just in addition to the purchase price. See, I still speak publishing lingo.
Erin, you mentioned the author strike previously. We have one question related to that here. Have you found that people have been holding off on pitching literary material during the strike?
I have found a lot of agents I've reached out, because I remember I worked during the last strike in 2008, and I was never busier. Everybody was like, books, we got time now. We can't read scripts. We can't do anything. We have nothing in production. Gimme, gimme, gimme. So that was great. And there was definitely a more upbeat tone, I think. This one is different. And I think that, as I mentioned, the fundamental building blocks are very rusty. And I think that's what everybody's kind of like, oh God, we're going to have to dismantle this whole thing and build it back up. But nobody, you know, the powers that be don't want to. But I feel like people are asking for material, but certain agents that I've reached out to have been like, I'm not doing anything till the strike's over. And that's probably agents that represent a lot of screenwriters, or the author is also a screenwriter, and in just solidarity, not doing anything. But my execs have still been asking for a lot of material and reading a lot of material and still optioning. It's just certain agencies are like, no, we're not doing anything. So, but I think that's rare. I think most people are still willing to, knowing that it can't last forever. We're going to have to come to a resolution at some point. So it's better to take the hopeful route. So I'm hoping that we're just come to an end of this pretty soon.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions here in the chat. So I would really like to thank you all for joining us here today for this insightful discussion on the film rights market and the journey from book to screen. I learned a lot. I hope our audience also learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure they did. So Erin, Deborah, Marion, thank you so much for sharing this amazing knowledge that you have. And I think one of our major learnings really is doing your homework, right? So I think we should all do our homework, come on the book fair Tuesday, so the day before the book fair, to the rights meeting reception, and talk to each other, well prepared with all the material that you need to really pitch your story, your content to the relevant people during the Frankfurt Book Fair. So thank you so much. Jenny, thank you so much for being here all the time. I know the audience hasn't seen her, but she was there all the time. Thank you. Have a beautiful afternoon, beautiful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Katarina.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.